the 10th of March, 2021. In this video, I'm going to discuss the root of negotiation, and the root of negotiation is the mutual capacity for violence. I will go on to discuss how violence begets trust, trust begets trust signals, and so on. And from there, you build society. At least in the human case, you do. It's not quite the same in every other, amongst other organisms. Anyway, negotiation is an emergent phenomenon. It is not something that everybody's just, born to do right away. Um, it's a situation. It's a phenomenon that emerges from the situation where two parties want a common thing or they have a common desire, and they both have the ability to injure one another swiftly. If everything goes horrible, if everything goes horribly wrong, they can injure one another. Destruction. We have to understand why. We have to think about the nature of destruction versus the nature of creation. Creation is costly. It takes time. It's expensive in every dimension. Destruction, on the other hand, is usually costly only in one dimension, and that cost is not very high compared to the cost of creation. It's quick. It's cheap. You smash something. It's gone. That thing may have taken an arbitrary amount of time to create. So, we see this in nature. Not just amongst humans, but we see this in nature as well. If we take two hungry tigers and put them in a pen together, they won't fight right away. They have to have some reason to fight beyond just not liking each other. They may enter a contest, but they won't try to kill each other, because trying to kill each other, pushing a fight too far, is too risky. They won't do that. A small tussle may be part of a negotiation, maybe a part of establishing pecking order, but the dominant one going too far against the weaker one, now there's a fuzzy line somewhere where pushing the weaker one too far crosses the line and now actually becomes a threat to the bigger one, because the smaller one thinks, hey, this is going to wipe me out. I have to go all out. That poses a risk to the dominant one of receiving a grievous injury, and a grievous injury takes too long to recover from, and it may even prove fatal. So, what you'll see in that case is you'll see these cats signal each other, give aggression, dominant signals to one another. Those dominant signals they sound horrible, but they actually keep the peace. This isn't so dissimilar to Trump being very bombastic in sometimes in his foreign policy. Remember, Trump was he was super hot or super cold in negotiation. He was over the top nice to some folks, and then other folks, he was super bombastic and sounded very belligerent. But that is negotiation. If you're playing on the same level as somebody else, or you have a mutual understanding, not that you're cooperating, not that you're friends, you may be in extreme contention, but it's already understood that this person gets that there's a level threat of violence on the table, and it goes both ways. In that case, being polite costs nothing. If you have somebody who's acted in bad faith over and over and over, though, being bombastic and signaling, hey, there's a line. You don't know where that line is, but, don't push it. You have to be very clear about that. That's what those bombastic signals are about. So North Korea, with Trump, North Korea's gotten away. I mean, they've got a whole cottage industry and saber rattling, right? And because North Korea is, I don't want to get into a tangent. That's a whole other video, but North Korea is it's the problem that nobody wants to go away because it's a useful problem. South Korea does not want to have a direct border with China, right? Kvetching about China and bitching about the situation with North Korea, and Russia using it as a sometime lever. It's the problem everybody loves to screw with. So, but there's a line. Nuclear weapons is that line, and so we saw an extreme amount of belligerence from the United States towards North Korea. But again, it was signals. It wasn't like there was about to be a bomb drop the next day. There were signals. And this is akin to the two tigers example I'm giving, where we've got two tigers in an enclosure. They don't like each other. They're trying to establish a pecking order, and they are both establishing that they're mutually dangerous. They don't need to get into a fight to prove it. If they do, they're going to get into a short tussle and they'll break up, but they won't really go after it. even if you put meat between them. Two hungry tigers, put a piece of meat between them, they will not go to war with one another. The reason is that a single meal is not worth risking, crippling or potentially life-threatening injury just for a single meal. Now, put a piece of meat between a small dog and a tiger, the tiger's just going to eat both of them, right? Because the dog's capacity for violence is so far below the threshold of risk for the tiger that there's no issue here. So in nature, we find this as well. We'll find the bigger cat will, or the whichever one asserts dominance more clearly, will eat, and then typically they'll actually share. They won't take the whole thing. They'll typically share with the other cat. That's a fascinating thing that we find, and it's occurring in a complete absence of friendship. It's occurring also in nearly a near absence of trust. They start developing trust from these encounters, though. With humans, we have the exact same dynamic. That negotiation emerges from the mutual capacity for violence. What defines civil society for humans, though, and also defines a relatively civil society for some other primates and a few other animals as well, but humans it's the kind of the craziest example and the most clear, is that humans will very often delegate both the capacity for violence and the authority for violence, especially the authority for violence. Who gets to decide we're going to hit that guy? Those things are delegated to a third party. And that is kind of the basis of society itself. So it occurs on many different levels too. So in the West especially, you've got this very strong sense of fairness in interpersonal combat. If a guy gets in a fight with another guy on the street, people usually just kind of watch, like, whoa, that's crazy. Just kind of see it. But if a guy got in a physical fight with a woman, like punched her in the face, it's expected behavior that most men nearby are going to all pile on that dude because it's so unmatched. In the typical case, you got a UFC fighter fighting some just dope who doesn't train. If the girl's a UFC fighter fighting some dope who doesn't train, then you wouldn't. That would go a different way. But in the typical case where, a man hauls off and punches a woman over an argument, it's expected behavior. It's an expected equalizing behavior for other men to pile on that guy, because he's violating the social trust structure at that point. There's all these silly, there's a lot of political nonsense around that, but the reality is, overwhelming dominance and violence taken out of step, out of turn, without some authority that we all agree on, issuing the order for that violence is considered a breach of trust in a functioning society anyway. It's considered a breach of trust that's so extreme that everybody must spontaneously dive in to stop it, and take care of it. So that detail of delegation is interesting. And some people today, I've had students and I've had a couple of proteges who, in geopolitics, who have mistaken the fact that you can have a contract negotiation without a gun on the table for this idea that somehow humans are above violence, that we don't need violence to create negotiation situations. We do. There's no... Just look at the history of the world. Any country that even begins to teeter on pure pacifism is gone. You're gone now. You have to maintain the capacity for violence. It doesn't have to be an overwhelmingly dominant capacity for violence, but the mutual capacity is the key. That's why the Cold War never became the hot war. There were little places where it did become hot, here and there along the fringe, but we never had a case, or we very rarely had a case, where you had American, like NATO soldiers shooting in a live shooting war with Soviet soldiers. We had proxy wars more often than not. We can argue about the validity of a lot of those. Every situation is a little different. There's a lot to be said about the validity or stupidity of some of those engagements. Not to mention war profiteering and all this, but if you back up Like, look at the world, look at Earth from an alien perspective, and you won't see individuals making decisions. You won't see this guy's a good actor, that guy's a bad actor. You won't see you won't you won't care about who this politician is or that politician is that everybody hates or loves. You will see essentially bacterial colonies organizing and contending with one another from a very distant perspective. That's all you'll really see, and that's really the more accurate model is uh, unconscious or semi-conscious superorganisms in contention, and there's nothing, there's no ability to contend you know if one party completely lacks the capacity for violence. There is no contention anymore. They just get consumed, and that's it. They're dissolved and gone. So the mutual capacity for violence is the foundation of negotiation. Negotiation occurs between individuals and it occurs between societies or societal organs. The violence itself does not have to be direct, does not have to be first person or first party violence. It can be third party violence, and doesn't have to be first person authority over violence. It can be third person authority over violence. It can be delegated, which is what we do we have a legal system, we have judges, they have authority, ultimately authority over violence. If you sue somebody and they owe you because of a contract violation, the judge will say, you owe them that. If they don't live up to it, cops will wind up showing up. Usually like a repo guy would show up to take your car, right? If you fight the repo guy, the cops are going to show up. If you had the cops, all the cops are going to show up. And, you get one bean, you get the whole burrito, it's over. You're not going to win that. In cases like Mexico, where you have a civil war occurring that, Americans won't call it a civil war. And that whole situation's kind of comical to me because just drop the drug laws and the whole thing kind of gets defunded. But on both sides, including the DEA and all that nonsense. But the imbalance in society down there, which originates with the imbalance of not following the Constitution of the United States, has manifested in a situation in Mexico where the bad faith actors have proliferated so much that they've had to become good faith actors because they've become so large that they have developed internal community dynamics, and they have to keep faith within their communities, at least within the gang, right? So within a single cartel, you have to maintain faith within the cartel or it gets very violent even internally. You have to establish faith and trust signals with other cartels. That's all negotiation. Now, there's a tremendous amount of violence in Mexico, because of the drug war. But what we see evolving over time is a semi-stable situation, which is kind of amazing given how hyper-violent that place can get. So there, you don't delegate to the cops because you don't trust the cops. They have a low trust society, so you get way more violence there. I live in a high trust society where we don't view the cops as the biggest gang here. In some places, that's true. Parts of Africa I used to work in, Southeast Asia I used to work in, it was absolutely true that the cops were the biggest gang and they were government funded. Well, you didn't trust them. So you've also got no faith that anybody you sign a contract with is going to live up to it, unless it's under like U.S. law, or if you're dealing with another American company, you could sue them under U.S. law, but you would never trust that a lawsuit that comes up in Afghani law is going to work out. You would never trust that a contract that was violated by somebody who's friends with a mayor in parts of the Philippines is going to wind up, that the judge is going to rule in your favor. And even if he did rule in your favor, you have gotten zero confidence that the cops are going to act on your behalf when it comes to wielding violence. Now, that, of course, hamstrings society, breaks everything apart. You can't get anything done. You can't do business because you can't do business. People are in poverty. People are in poverty. They're desperate. They're more likely to break faith when they are desperate. And so, it's a sort of a spiral. But you notice how many times I've mentioned trust here and breaking trust. That's because mutual capacity for violence begets negotiation. Negotiation begets cooperation. Cooperation, like a pattern of good faith negotiations, winds up giving you, those become trust signals. Trust signals, remember the lions, they have aggression signals. They're aggression signals, they're dominant signals. Those convert after a number of negotiations to trust signals. Trust signals are the opposite of aggression signals. Instead of showing that you're a very aggressive, that you're capable of violence, or that you're aggressive, you wind up signaling that you have concern for that other party, that you care about them. You start showing friendship signals, and it becomes common to hop over negotiation and go straight to cooperation. And that's what happens within families. That's kind of the definition of a family unit, is a unit where knowledge between parties is so complete that you don't have to negotiate 90% of the time, and you can jump straight to cooperation. That happens among friends. That is what friendship really is. You're not wondering what game they're playing. You know what game they're playing. They're playing the be your friend game, and you're trying to help each other out and be good to one another. You got people that, like, the most aberrant people in society are the people that would pretend to be your friend, take advantage of you, abuse your trust, and then leave you hanging. Right? We've got thousands of stories about people like this. This is the basis of the bad guy in most movies, or in most classical stories, is the oath breaker, the cheater, the liar. So mutual capacity for violence becomes negotiation. Repeated negotiation becomes trust. That begets trust signals. Trust signals beget cooperation, and the pattern of cooperation and trust across a large number of people, that is the foundation of where you start getting culture. You start having to agree on meanings so that your trust signals, they're no longer just trust signals and good faith signals. They become like detailed language. And, at this point in human development, we've got complex ideas wrapped up in single words, which is amazing. So anyway, this idea that violence, whether or not it's first party violence, the mutual capacity for violence is the foundation of negotiation, is critical to understand if you want to understand anything at all about geopolitics. So as I continue to discuss in different videos elements of geopolitics or things about geopolitics, we have to always come back to the root of cooperation negotiation, that it all begins with mutual capacity for violence, because that is, at the end, when everything goes wrong and you can't trust anybody at all, when in a trustless environment, that is, how bad can this party hurt me versus what's the benefit of working with them. That's kind of the lowest, worst case calculus that occurs between parties in an absence of faith. And when you deal with geopolitics, you're talking about societies, superorganisms that are semi-conscious at best. They do not have faith. They cannot operate on faith. They can only operate on capacity and evaluate things in terms of capacity. So that's critical to understand. If people think like country A and country B are friends, there's no such thing as friends in geopolitics. It doesn't work that way. Not everything's cold calculated either, because there are trust signals that can occur, but it never rises to the level of actual friendship. That's not a thing that can happen, because no nation has a single brain. No nation has there's no alpha wave in a society. There's something you can kind of tap into that's similar to that, but there's no actual thing that's called consciousness across an entire society. It doesn't work that way. Maybe in the future with AI or with neural linked thoughts and whatever, but we're not there yet. Even then, we have a different model where we could evaluate that. But if you want to understand geopolitics, you got to understand that mutual capacity for violence is the foundation of negotiation, and that's kind of where everything comes out. And violation of trust within a society is the ultimate poison to that society. And right now, a lot of the West is racing is on a horribly precipitous fall from a high trust society to low trust societies. And you're about to start seeing low trust. Well, we already do see low trust society type problems manifesting in the West. And there will be a culmination. There is a price to pay for that. There's a price to pay for that in an authoritarian society as well. China, they've completely stripped their public of the capacity for violence, but the third party that's supposed to wield violence on your behalf is abusing it. That's not going to work out very well. That's a extremely unstable situation. That's not going to work out well for China at all. That's going to blow up at some point. Everywhere you see this, you will see instability manifest. And, the United States Constitution, the Second Amendment, is not about hunting. It's not about self-defense. Remember, the Second Amendment was written at a time when the United States had just fought a war of independence from the dominant international power, using privately owned, not just firearms, but privately owned cannon, privately owned navy. So when they were saying the right to bear arms, that's a completely different thing than, do you need this for self-defense, or, is someone really going to come invade your home? That's not the argument. The argument is to raise the cost. But when we're talking about negotiating between parties, if the government becomes tyrannical, you have to raise the cost of negotiation, or raise the cost of tyranny, to force them to negotiate. Because negotiation between parties is the power mode for humans. That's the most powerful mode, is cooperation. You give up cooperation between you and the government when you abdicate both your capacity and your authority to violence. You can't do that. Not if you want a stable society in a free society. You can't do that. And if the government it becomes a bad faith actor, and the public doesn't have the capacity for violence, the whole thing becomes unstable. And that's why we're going to see in Europe this perpetual swinging, not between right and left the way we would think in the United States. It's not just a pure political pendulum. Europe is preset towards authoritarianism, where the people have no right to violence, no right to the authority of violence, and no capacity for violence individually. They're purely authoritarian, so they're always in a quest for the best dictator that they can find. That's their notion of liberty, is not individual liberty, but that the state gives you liberty. So they're always looking for the next best king. So the fight over there, the political fight over there, is within the authoritarian side. Should they be globalist or should they be nationalist, is more or less what they contend over. And this is always unstable. If you look at European history, Europe is never really stable. And a lot of that instability traces back to periods where you do have a government behaving in good faith or acting in good faith, and then something changes and they become bad faith actors, break faith with the public. Now you have, instead of a government that's nice and you can trust, and they're giving you, you have good faith with them, and they're giving you what you feel is liberty. They make you feel like you have liberty, or let you at least do stuff. And that switches over to tyranny. That capacity for violence that the government wields civilly shifts from being aimed at contract enforcement to just being civil coercion. And the people really have nothing to do until, by the end of it, they flip out and become so hyper-violent that who owns the arms doesn't matter anymore, because the army all quits, and the police quit, and everybody picks sides. And then you get Jacobins and the French Revolution, all this horrible mess, before you wind up reforming the country in a new shape. So if you don't want this cycle of revolutions, you have to accept that a democratic cycle builds into it the ability to have a revolution without a fight. And that's because everybody has the capacity for violence, so nobody's got an edge on coercion. And that means even in the worst case, everybody still has to work together to some degree, or at least cohabit. So that's kind of that's the purpose and the power of the United States Second Amendment. And the complete departure from constitutionalism in the United States, which is almost complete at this point. The American empire is trying to strangle the American Republic. And these notions, these concepts of negotiation and the foundation of negotiation being misunderstood today plays into that to a very strong degree. So I've kind of gone on a tangent here a bit. This video, I'm going to put it on YouTube. I will also put it on Rumble. Haven't decided if I'm going to put it on BitChute or not. The problem is, of course, that discussing these issues is controversial on YouTube these days. So I don't know how long I'll be there before I wind up, my channel probably get canned at some point there. So that's all I got for now. Continue talking about other stuff later on. These subjects just keep coming up over and over, so I'll just document them in videos. Thanks.